On the day that the show was shot, I wasn't sure that it was just going to be me out there by myself or if there was going to be just me and the therapist. The therapist was Mike Liu, and he had written a book called Victims No Longer. And I had read that book, and it had been very helpful for me. So when I found out he was the therapist, I thought, oh, this is going to be good because he knows the topic. This would be great. But I was still very nervous because they did not follow up with me. And when I got to the show, I thought, oh, it's just going to be me. So I walked in the green room, and to my surprise, there were 2 other black males in the room. And when I walked in, they said, oh, it's you. And I said, what? They said, well, when we called, or when they talked to us, they told us that another guy had decided to come forward. And because he came forward, I came forward. And so we kind of joked around. It's like, well, I didn't want to be out there by myself. And none of us wanted to be out there by ourselves. But so the 3 of us working together, and just that moment of we can do this, together we can do this, was really great because it sort of set the tone for us to get out there and tell the story. And so in telling the story, it lasted for an hour. The show lasted for an hour, and it flew by. And I, of course, thought we didn't go over enough. This is not good enough. This is not going to help. And but when I was leaving, one of the producers stopped me and asked me. We had 2 callers on the show. One caller said, "Thank you for being on the show because I don't think I would have had the courage to do that." I did not necessarily consider what we were doing courageous. I just wanted to help people. And he said, well, I wouldn't have the courage to do that. And I said, well, this is the reason that we're doing it, is we want to help people. We don't let you know you're not by yourself. I just felt that somebody needed to do something. But I got a shock after the show when a producer asked me to talk to a caller that was on the line. And apparently a young woman had called. She had seen the show. She was a little bit triggered by it. They knew what community she lived in, and they were concerned she might hurt herself. They had emergency vehicles headed to her house. She just said she wanted to talk to someone who was on the show. And they asked me if I would talk to her. And I was shocked initially, but then I said, sure, I'll talk to her. And I remember it like it was yesterday because she was very nice, and she said, hello, were you on? I said, oh, hi, I'm Hart, I was on the show. And she said, oh, thank you guys for doing that. And I said, well, it sounds like, you had to live through something like that too. And I'm so sorry you had to. And she said, oh, people should not do these things to children. And I said, well, we can heal from that. We can get better from it. As a matter of fact, we have people coming to help you. And she said, well, I know that's what they said. And then I heard sirens on the phone. And I said, will you hear those sirens? And she said, yeah. And I said, well, I think those are the people who we're sending to help you. And so I continued to talk to her, and we got to the point where she was hearing a knock on the door. And I said, so those are the people who are coming to help you. We're going to have to hang up, and you're going to have to knock on the door and let them in. Will you do that? And she said, yes. And I said, well, thank you for calling. And she said, thank you for being there. And I didn't feel good. I didn't. Everybody said, well, you were breaking the silence. You should feel good about that. I felt deep concern. I thought, are we hurting people? We didn't want to hurt people. Are we unintentionally hurting people? And I had to balance that feeling with thank you for being there, because I wouldn't have had the courage to tell my story. And that gentleman was going to talk to Mike Liu when he got to his town. So I knew we'd help people. But that call told me we might be hurting people too. And it left me conflicted about my decision to be on the show. Not conflicted about stories that needed to be told, and stories need to be told all across the spectrum. But it wasn't, it didn't make me feel good. But my mother called and came to visit the next weekend. And we had a great conversation, and it started a healing in our relationship that lasted pretty intensely for about 3 years. And then we became great adult friends. And she was there for me. And she passed away 3 years ago yesterday. And I was able to be there for her. I was in the room with her with two of my sisters. And it just, that's what love does. My mom was in a lot of pain when she heard my story. She always wanted to be just a good mother. That's all she wanted. And she felt like she hadn't. And over the years we talked, and I was like, you did the best you could living through the challenges that you were living through. You didn't intentionally want this to happen. And then you came to me when you knew I was hurting. Not everybody gets that. Not everybody gets that response. But that's what love does. Through her pain, through her hurt, she came. And so I was very happy to be able to be there with her. And in the last 2 years of her life, we talked every day on the phone when I was traveling and doing my work, because that's what love does. Love heals. My sister came to visit 2 weeks after the show. She hadn't been to Washington, so I was giving her the tour. The show was downstream for me. It was 2 weeks. I was trying to move on with my life. We were walking down in Georgetown, and two guys were approaching us. And one guy said, "Oh, it took a lot of courage to do what you did." And I said, "What?" He said, "Oh, that show, you know." And at first I was like, what show is he talking about? And then it occurred to me. And I said, thank you. Thank you. He said, "Yeah, it took a lot of courage." And he reached out and he shook my hand. And at that time, I was just hanging out with my sister. We were just being brother and sister. And so it kind of took me by surprise. And that's when it let me know, oh, people are looking at me.